As you're navigating your academic or professional journey, having mentors can make a huge difference. In academic environments, and sometimes beyond academia too, the mentor-mentee structure is built into the culture. It's formalized. You'll have a senior person who travels your path or one similar to help guide you along the way. So there's a supply of mentors ready to be tapped. But there's a catch. How do you choose a mentor who's the right fit for you? How do you manage a mentoring relationship to maximize its effectiveness? Should you choose someone well known in your field? Someone with a broad network who can help connect you to a wide range of contacts and opportunities? Or should you have multiple mentors? Maybe one who's a real subject matter expert, another who's worked across different fields, and a third who truly understands the path you took to get where you are. In this episode, we're going to explore how to think about the most impactful way to identify and manage mentoring relationships with Dr. Bill Mahoney, Associate Dean of Student and Postdoctoral Affairs the University of Washington. Let's dig in. Bill, you've mentored many PhDs, guiding them throughout their academic journeys. What qualities should PhDs look for when choosing a mentor?
I think you want to find people who are open-minded and people who are willing to listen first. And by that, it's very easy for a mentor to say, I'm successful, I followed this path, and everyone who I mentor should follow the same path. But it's important to understand where students are coming from, what matters to them. So really to listen first and to understand what they need to be successful. Once you understand that, you may actually find out that you don't have the right advice or the right connections and right guidance to provide them. So you can provide some, but then your job is both to support them, but also connect them to the larger network so that they can get the advice, the guidance that they need to be supportive in their unique interests and their goals that they've set out for themselves.
Thanks for that really good and specific guidance there. Thinking about mentorship relationships, what does a successful mentoring interaction really look like from your perspective? And how should mentees help foster this kind of productive, fulfilling dynamic?
So I think mentees need to first look at themselves, right? It's easy to reach out to someone and say, hey, will you be my mentor, but not actually have any specific things you're asking for. And so there are a bunch of tools out there that I encourage mentees to look at. No tool is perfect, and so you shouldn't just limit yourself to one, but look at a couple of them. Imagine Ph.D., created by the group that we're here for, Graduate Career Consortium, My IDP for STEM trainees. There's other ones that are just evolving over time because, as I said, none of these fit everyone's specific needs. But the main goal of any of these tools is to create a list of questions that you can then bring to your mentors and try to get advice from. If you don't understand what it is that you're asking for, how do you expect someone to actually provide advice for you? So you walk in with some clear questions, and that's really what those tools are designed to help you generate. So the mentor and the mentee should discuss it. It's a conversation tool, but the mentee has to take a little bit of ownership of that relationship. But then once you identify mentors, you then are very clear with what you each expect of each other, how often you want to meet, how often you want to check in, if there's specific people in the mentors network that you want to be connected to, how's that going to be managed? And you build this relationship over time. And sometimes you need more interaction, sometimes you need less. And it really is just making sure that you're both on the same page. The biggest thing that I observe when I help mentors and mentees navigate difficult relationships is they each have a plan in their head, but oftentimes they haven't discussed that plan with each other. And they both might think that they're going down a proper path. But until they come to a shared agreement, a shared understanding of what each person expects and wants, then they're going to potentially be in conflict. And so we try to build tools and expectations for open and regular communication. And with that as your foundation, then usually the relationship works pretty well.
Thanks for that, Bill. It really leads into my next question. There's a famous Tolstoy quote about how happy families are all alike, but every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And I'm thinking about mentoring relationships and some of the pitfalls to avoid or warning signs of an unhappy mentoring relationship. You just started to allude to it.
The idea that you're going to create a mini me, like that's not the goal of being a mentor. You want to see what is unique in the person that you're mentoring and then help them find their success and happiness. And these are big questions. So if you haven't spent time thinking about it yourself, again, how do you expect a mentor to jump to that? The other thing to highlight is that we learn a lot more from our challenges or when things don't go well. And a mentor's job is not there to make everything easy necessarily, but is to help give you the tools so you can address the challenges in your life. And if you have a mentor who doesn't have the time, who doesn't have the expertise or the willingness to get uncomfortable with you and live in that space of saying, let's figure this out, or here's a potential way to figure it out on your own, then again, it's not going to be a productive and really fulfilling relationship. And for that reason, the other big advice I give to mentees is that as much as we work for if you're a STEM researcher, you're working in a single lab, or if you're in humanities, you're connecting with a single professor about what the big question is that you're going to address and how you're going to approach it. You also need other mentors in your life to give different perspectives, multiple mentors or a board of directors that you don't need to follow everyone's advice to the letter of the law, but you have to take in a bunch of information and then figure out which pieces you want to take and apply to your life. And you need to have those outside perspectives and people that you can go to ask questions about what's going on in your life, what's going on in your research and your future career. And then you figure out how to play each of the different parts against each other and come up with a shared vision that you then share back with your different mentors. So getting lots of advice and perspectives will help you feel better supported in the long run.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And you mentioned the board of directors idea. You'll have certain mentors for certain dimensions, like you mentioned there. Not everyone has expertise or experience in a particular industry, maybe, or even particular track within academia, and also the social aspect of things as well. There are some that are more adept at navigating than others. So having multiple mentors, of course, then you have to sift through those different pieces of advice and try to make sense of it in a way that you're comfortable with. You talk about curriculum, and I was really interested to see that in reading your materials. Hidden curriculum as far as among the topics you help mentees navigate as part of the holistic support that you provide. What do you mean by that, by hidden curriculum?
Yeah, it's a term that's used in higher ed pretty extensively, and it just means that by being from a majority identity, you know what to expect when you go through college or graduate school or beyond. And oftentimes that makes it more difficult for people from a non-majority identity to be successful or feel supported. And so when I talk to faculty and senior folks, I talk about at a very high level saying just because it was difficult for us to go through this doesn't mean that we have to make it difficult on the next generation to go through. People from a majority background are well versed in asking people for letters of reference, to going to office hours, to seeking the support when they feel like they need it. And sometimes people from a non-majority identity say, if I expose that I'm not comfortable or I don't know the answer, then people are going to think I don't belong here. And so a lot of the things that we do in the different spaces where I spend time is trying to break down those barriers, make it okay or normalize the fact that people should ask for questions, and say that you as someone from a non-majority identity should be willing and able to ask those questions because someone else is definitely going to do it. And so we spend a lot of time in our workshops or in our one-on-one counseling sessions talking with students about where they can find a safe space to lean on their peers so that they're all together working together as a cohort to figure out the answers, and to be not afraid of asking for help when they need it because it will help them be successful long-term and they don't need to struggle. Grad school is hard. It should be rigorous. Like, not everyone gets a Ph.D. 2% of the population has a Ph.D. It's a very prestigious and high accomplishment that our trainees get, but it can be rigorous, yet it doesn't have to be unnecessarily difficult. And those are two things that we try to talk about in different spheres so that everyone who enters just doesn't get a PhD because they've been around long enough to get a PhD. They have to work hard, but we will help them, give them the tools so they can accomplish that as long as they put in the hard work and do the work that's required for the ultimate degree.
And I want to ask you a follow up on that because you did reference kind of the messaging that you send in these interactions to talk about these resources and how it's not a sign of weakness or an exposure of maybe knowledge that you might not have. And I completely understand why people would be hesitant to do that from all sorts of backgrounds, or maybe particularly a case from non-majority backgrounds. How do you have those conversations to create those safe spaces?
It depends on the audience, right? With students, it is about just having that open conversation. We talk about it I run a first gen identity group as well as international identity group, and we collaborate with our URM groups on campus to normalize it and say, these are difficult things. Here's what it means to get an advanced degree, what a general exam means, what connecting to multiple people in different networks, when to look outside of the university for support. And so they understand it's an expectation that they should be doing and that they should lean on each other or the class that's directly above them on advice. And then with the faculty or senior leaders of the university, I have to remind them often that students have this internalization of, I'm not enough, I might be an imposter, and to make sure that they're oftentimes saying, yes, I'm successful, but let me tell you about the times when I failed. When I introduce myself and I say, I was a postdoc and I moved into a faculty position and I ran a federally funded lab and then I have become a dean, that sounds like a nice linear and sometimes obvious career path. What I don't talk about in that quick intro is the grants that didn't get funded, the mentees that maybe I didn't do the best with, the papers that got triaged, and all the different struggles that I had. And so when we talk when I was still running my lab, we talked about the things that went in that didn't get supported, the grants that didn't get funded, and the times when I struggled, so that they realized that the struggle was normal. And in academia, we spend a lot more time in those failure spaces, right? We submit a lot more papers than get published. We submit a lot more grants that get funded. And you need to celebrate when the paper gets submitted or when the grant gets submitted or a student passes their exam and then moves on to candidacy and then eventually gets their Ph.D. or gets their master's. There are little success stories along the way that if we just wait for the big products at the end, we're going to be waiting a long time. And it's going to be demoralizing for the people that are in our training groups. So again, with the senior faculty, we talk about what's the environment they're creating, what's the culture of support that they have in their research groups or in their labs, and hope that they then pay that forward so they can help support the people so that they will see themselves as being successful scientists, researchers, public policy, you name it, in the future. But they're setting the groundwork and the foundation that they can pick themselves up when things don't go well. And they have a community that will wrap their hands around them and help them be supported and successful as they move forward.
Thanks, Bill, for highlighting how it can be very easy as a faculty member to become more senior. You're getting further away from those struggles. It's not top of mind. You're thinking about what's going on, what's going to happen, your future work, grants, other mentorship relationships. You're not remembering how difficult it was. And like you said, on paper or in a short introduction, it sounds like, yeah, it makes complete sense. So there was probably not a lot of struggle there. It must be me who's struggling because I don't belong here. That kind of dynamic, so destructive and not accurate, but we tell ourselves stories like that all the time. So thanks for going into detail there. As we wrap up, I want to shift a little bit and ask you about career and professional development generally and taking into account your path. Also that, as you pointed out, people may get a master's. They may decide after getting a PhD, they're going to work in policymaking, industry, a different role. They're going to look for meaningful work outside of academia as well. What's one piece of advice that you give to mentees and others who are interested in landing their dream job beyond academia?
I think the term dream job needs to be explored. And when a student comes to me and asks that, I say, how do you know that job X is your dream job? We spend all of our time as you're getting trained as a master's or a PhD student in the academy, and you think, oh, being in industry or working in the government is this sort of holy grail place where I want to go if I don't want to write grants or I don't want to teach or I don't want to have to run a federally funded lab. We actually haven't experienced that. And so before identifying what the dream job is, it's really trying to figure out who in your network can you reach out to say, what does a day in the life of this job versus that job look like? And start to gather information. And luckily, I'm tied to grad education. And so all students they come up with a question and then they explore it, whether it's in something that happened in the past, if you're a history grad student or you're discovering something new in the lab. At the root, we're training people to ask big questions, collect data, advance the field. And we feel comfortable with that framing. And so use that same framework to then explore career options in A, B, and C areas. So reach out to your network, have an informational interview. If you can, do an internship or spend a day in the life of, so that you can understand what's good and what's bad in those jobs. Most of the biomed students I talk to don't realize that if they leave the academy, but then they work in a company, you won't write a grant necessarily. You could, but you will write white papers and have to convince investors and founders to continue to fund your arm of the company. And if they're not interested, similar to the NIH not being interested in someone's lab, the funding goes away. So you have the same decision points and arguments to make. It's just at maybe a quicker time scale or a quicker burn rate of your funding if you're in the industry. And so normalizing that you're trained to do things inside and outside the academy by getting this degree, a lot of the things are going to be the same. There are going to be different aspects to it. And so you have to figure out what it is and why you think a job is your dream job first. And then once you have identified that, then leveraging that network, because anyone who applies for a job inside or outside the academy, you're qualified, right? You have a PhD, you have training, you've been trained to think and to do. You still need someone at a company to look at your resume and your CV and pull it out of that pile of resumes. And so having that informational interview is never a place to say, hey, can you give me a job? But it is one to follow up later on and say, oh, I talked with you and I learned and really enjoyed what I learned about your company. I just want to let you know I applied for a job there. And if you have any way of connecting with the HR manager and say, be on the lookout for my resume, I'd really appreciate it. So leveraging your relationships, and that those are the people who successfully move into that first position and the second position, because as I said, the whole group of people who are applying are educated enough and have these experiences, and you just need that personal touch that'll help make that transition a little bit smoother and give you a chance to shine in an interview. And if you can do that, then the job is yours to take.
Dr. William Mahoney, thank you so much for your insights. I know it's going to benefit listeners a lot. Also, for pointing out there's always a formal process and an informal process. So being aware that those things are happening behind the scenes and that people do this all the time. Yes, you have to apply for the job, but actually having conversations and building relationships in addition to that is so critical to get your resume pulled out of the pile, as you pointed out. Thanks for being here. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you very much.
And listeners, thank you for being here on this episode of When Science Speaks, and I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.